Good evening, my friend. My name is Noah Bennett. If this is your first night here, know that you're now part of a gentle, growing circle. People from all over the world gathering together to find a moment of peace after a long day. Tonight's story will take you on a quiet journey, not through crowded streets or noisy cities, but far beyond them, higher than the clouds, where silence and starlight live side by side. Now allow yourself to get comfortable. Lie down. I'll count slowly from 10 down to 1. With every number, you'll feel yourself drifting deeper into stillness, into calm. 10. Feel the bed beneath you, holding you safely. Beneath the bed, the ground, steady, patient, unshakable. Let it support you completely. 9. Bring your attention to your body. Maybe your feet, your calves. Your hands still hold some tension. Just notice it and let it melt away like sunlight touching snow. 8. You're safe now. Let my voice be your anchor, your quiet companion, guiding you through calm waters. There's nowhere you need to go, nothing you need to do. 7. The day is done. Whatever was said, whatever remains unfinished, can now rest. Imagine each thought drifting by like clouds in the night sky, appearing for a moment, then fading away. 6. Peace lives within you. It's always been there, a soft light, deep inside. All you have to do is notice it, like the faint glow of a distant star that never stops shining. 5. You deserve to rest, not because you've earned it, but because you are human. Remember this simple truth. You deserve to rest. 4. Gratitude for the roof above you, the pillow beneath you, the breath inside your lungs. Gratitude for this very moment. Simple, honest, enough. 3. Begin to imagine a still night sky stretching endlessly above you. The first stars appear, pale and silver. The air is cool, clean, and quiet. You are safe beneath this vast velvet sky. 2. Scan your body one last time. Everything that needed to soften has softened. Everything that needed to rest is resting. Now you're floating gently between waking and dreaming. 1. Complete surrender. The world falls silent. Your breath becomes the tide. Your heart beats its steady rhythm of peace. Probably the most boring night train in the world. And we will follow them as they sit on the train doing very little, and eventually, one by one, go to their sleeper carriages and go to sleep. These stories are meant to bring a smile to your face as you drift off to sleep, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, let's do the relaxation session now, which will take a few minutes before tonight's sleep story. I'm going to count down from 10 to 1, and as I do, allow yourself to let go more and more. 10. Feel the support of the bed beneath you, or the floor, or whatever you lie upon tonight. Really feel that support. And beneath all of that, there is the support of the earth. Our home, our constant support. And notice that the more you become aware of that support, the more you can let go, the more you can sink into this moment. 9. You are safe. Know that tonight my voice is nothing but a friend, a guide of kindness that will only ever take you to safe places. Allow my voice to be an anchor of peace, guiding you to beautiful, wondrous places. 8. Become aware of your body now. And as you do, just become aware of your breath for a moment. Perhaps take a deep breath in through your nose when you're ready, and breathe out when you're ready. And maybe another deep breath, in and out. And as you become aware of that breath, the breathing out with each out-breath, let go a little more. Maybe move through your body. Check where you're holding tension or pain. Maybe it's in your feet, your lower legs, your thighs, your belly, your chest, your back, your shoulders, your hands, your arms, your neck. Or maybe you're like me. Do you hold the tension in your face? Just let it all go now. 7. The day is done. Whatever has been, has been. Whatever will be, will be. Whatever thoughts you may be having, don't fight them. Just see them for what they are. Thoughts. A symptom of being human. And as they arrive, welcome them. And then just let them go. Watch them float away like leaves on a moonlit river, or clouds passing through a starlit sky. 6. This is your moment. This is your time. You deserve rest. You deserve peace. There is nowhere to be now, nowhere to go, no obligations. Absolutely nothing to do but settle into this moment. 5. Peace lives within you. It is always there. It's just waiting to be found, waiting to be felt. Maybe you can find it tonight. Maybe you can journey to that peace with your mind's eye. Now, maybe you find it in your chest or in your head. Wherever you might find it, know that it's a constant friend, for perhaps feel a little gratitude now. Gratitude for the simple things, for the shelter you have tonight, whatever it may be, for the use of your body, for the ability to just lie here and listen to a sleep story for those you love and who love you. Know that you are loved, whoever you are and wherever you are tonight. 3. Begin to engage with your imagination now. Begin to see a thoroughly unremarkable looking train. This is the most boring night train in the world. Nothing special about it, nothing interesting, not even its destination. So enjoy this moment of humor in this place far away from all that you know. 2. Check in with your body one more time now. releasing anywhere that you're still holding on, and one completely letting go now, as I tell you tonight's sleep story. There was once a train. Some might say the most boring train in the world.
How can you have a boring train, you ask? Well, it's not so much that the train had a personality that was boring, more so that everything that happened on the train was incredibly boring. All of the staff that worked on the train were boring. All of the passengers were the most boring people that had ever gotten on trains ever in all of time, and by their own admission. So allow me, if you will, to begin to tell you about each of these people aboard the most boring night train in the world. The train departed from Platform 4 at precisely 10:04 p.m., a time chosen not because it was convenient, but because it had accidentally become the official time after a scheduling typo in 1973. No one ever fixed it. No one ever cared enough to. The yellow line on the platform had faded into a color that could only be described as not really a color anymore. The only person who had ever mentioned it worked for the railway paint department in 1986 and is now retired in Kent. When the doors closed, they did so in the slow, resigned way of someone agreeing to a meeting they didn't want to attend. The train moved forward at a speed that could best be described as eventually. Inside, everything had been designed to inspire mild, polite acceptance. The seats were covered in a fabric approved by a committee that had only ever once met and then decided never to meet again. The lights had two settings, on and very on. Mr. Benson, the conductor, appeared exactly on schedule, as he always did, holding his ticket puncture like a man who had long ago accepted his destiny. He didn't smile, but then again, neither did anyone else. It wasn't that kind of train. The first passenger in carriage B was a man named Peter Grimley. Peter was the sort of man who carried exactly one biscuit with him at all times in its original packaging for reasons no one had ever asked about. He didn't eat it. He just liked to know it was there.
Every 10 minutes, he would gently press the biscuit packet between his thumb and forefinger as though confirming its ongoing existence. In 32 years of traveling on this train, he had never once opened it. Directly opposite Peter sat Mrs. Celia Moth, a woman whose idea of adventure was slightly adjusting the angle of her reading glasses. She read the same magazine every night, issue 147 of Practical Lampshades Monthly, published in 1998. She'd never got past page 11. She wasn't stuck. She just liked page 11. Further down the garage was Mr. Colin Drum, who had boarded this train every night since 2004 without actually needing to go anywhere. It was simply cheaper than heating his flat. He wore a beige scarf that he referred to as the one, not because it was special, but because it was the only one he owned. Colin's proudest achievement was knowing exactly which part of the journey produced the smallest rattle. In seat 22A was a woman named Barbara Griggs, who was knitting a beige rectangle. No one, including Barbara, knew what the rectangle was for. It wasn't a scarf. It wasn't a jumper. It was just the rectangle. She had been working on it for 7 years, and the length had recently reached what she called a promising stage. The train was, technically speaking, going somewhere. It had a destination printed on the front in blocky black letters, but no one had ever actually looked at it. It wasn't the kind of train that inspired curiosity.
If you asked any of the passengers where they were headed, they would either shrug or say something vague like, "down the line," as though the line itself was the point. Somewhere near Carriage D, a tea trolley made its slow progress through the corridor. It was pushed by a man named Gerald, who had never once in his entire career needed to top up the sugar. There were 6 tea bags, 3 of which had been there since 2012. No one minded.
They didn't really drink the tea anyway. People on this train didn't drink things to enjoy them. They drank them to pass time in the least remarkable way possible. Gerald's trolley had a slight squeak in its left wheel, which occurred every 5.5 steps. He had once, years ago, thought about fixing it, but the idea had seemed too ambitious, so he hadn't. Now, it was simply part of the train. People barely noticed it, except for Peter Grimley, who gave it a small nod each time it passed, as though acknowledging an old acquaintance. The lights in the corridor dimmed a fraction around 11 p.m. Not because anyone requested it, but because they were on an ancient timer installed sometime in the late 1970s. No one knew exactly where the switch was. It just happened. Barbara Griggs adjusted her rectangle knitting to the evening position, which meant exactly nothing, except that she was now holding it at a slightly lower angle. Mr. Benson, the conductor, walked through the train with the same quiet dedication he'd shown for decades. He had a small notebook where he made notes that didn't matter, but he filled it out with the care of a man tending to a garden of mildly damp gravel. The train itself was long, but not so long that anyone ever got lost in it. It had 5 main carriages, 2 of which were lined with rows of standard seats, one that held the buffet and the trolley supplies, and 2 sleeper carriages with narrow, softly lit corridors. The whole thing gave the impression of something that had been built a long time ago, and then carefully maintained just enough to keep going. The walls were covered in a kind of beige paneling, with a faint pattern that might once have meant something, but no longer did. There were small metal coat hooks above every seat, even though no one had ever been seen using them. The windows had curtains that could be pulled across, but usually weren't, mostly because they made a soft rasping sound that people couldn't be bothered with. The sleeper compartments were arranged in a neat row, each with 2 bunks, a little shelf, and a fold-down ladder that always creaked in the exact same way. The pillows had that hotel-style stiffness to them, the kind that didn't really invite sleep, but didn't get in the way of it either. Every compartment had a small reading lamp with an on-off switch that required a very specific amount of pressure to work. Regular travelers knew the trick. Somewhere near the front, the buffet counter still had a faint smell of tea that had been steeped for far too long, and coffee that no one had actually ordered in years. The staff didn't try to make the train feel lively or inviting. They didn't need to. Everyone on board already knew what to expect. They weren't here for surprises. Among the new passengers that evening that had never traveled on the most boring night train was the Barlow family, who had spent the entire time on the platform carefully comparing their seat numbers to the diagram on their tickets. Mr. Barlow had even brought a small torch to check the print in the dim light, which impressed absolutely no one. His wife Margaret had packed 3 sandwiches wrapped in cling film, each labeled just in case. They were identical. She would later spend 20 minutes deciding which just-in-case moment was the right one. Their teenage son Kevin had headphones on, but wasn't listening to anything. He was simply wearing them as a polite barrier between himself and the world.
Occasionally, he sighed at a volume that suggested mild disappointment, but nothing stronger. He had brought a puzzle book with exactly one puzzle completed, a word search from 2019. He wasn't planning to do another.
A few rows down sat Doris and Frank Malalleri, a retired couple who had decided to take a little trip just because. Neither of them could remember exactly why they had chosen this train in particular, but neither felt it was worth questioning. Doris was wearing a cardigan with buttons shaped like small flowers. Frank had bought a thermos of lukewarm tea and a newspaper from 3 days ago, which he folded and refolded as though this were the main event of the journey. 2 seats behind them was a man named Neil, with a very large, very square suitcase. He had insisted on keeping it on the seat beside him, despite there being overhead racks that would have fitted perfectly. When asked why, he simply said, "I like to keep an eye on it," as though anything of interest could possibly happen to it on this train. The suitcase contained mostly socks. Further down the garage was a young couple, Allison and Jake, who were taking their first night train together. Allison had backed an entire picnic for reasons she couldn't fully explain. Jake had brought a travel pillow that was far too big for public transport. They were both determined to make the journey an experience, but already 20 minutes in, they had run out of things to say. They would later spend 2 full hours talking about whether the light above their seat was too warm or just warm enough. Across the aisle, a woman named Marjorie was knitting a jumper for a dog she didn't own. She wasn't sure why she'd chosen a dog jumper. He didn't have a dog or know anyone with one. It had simply seemed like a sensible project. Her wall was the exact shade of oatmeal. She occasionally muttered, "Steady on," to herself, as if the jumper might do something unpredictable. In seat 34 sat Trevor, who had brought a small notebook and a pen, but nothing to write about. He opened it every 10 minutes, nodded to himself, and closed it again. At one point, he drew a straight line across the top of a page which he seemed quietly pleased with. Trevor was the kind of man who carried spare paper clips in his coat pocket just in case, though he had never once used them. Hereby, a woman with the practical name of Linda sat with a paperback she had no real intention of reading. She opened it to page 1, stared at it for a long time, then closed it with the air of someone who had achieved something. She repeated this at regular intervals. If anyone had asked her what the book was about, she wouldn't have known. Behind Linda was a family of 4 who had brought matching neck pillows, matching water bottles, and matching expressions of quiet resignation. The youngest child, around 8 years old, had declared this journey the longest train journey in the world. After roughly 9 minutes, his older sister was determined to look unimpressed by everything. Their parents spoke in that calm, measured way parents use when they've already accepted that bedtime won't go well. And in seat 40, a man named Raymond had fallen asleep almost immediately after boarding, with his arms folded and his head slightly tilted forward, like someone who'd been practicing this position for years. He didn't snore, which was somehow even more boring than if he did. Every so often, his head bobbed a little with the rhythm of the train, giving the impression that he was agreeing with something no one had said. Around 11:30, Mr. Benson gave his customary nod at the carriage clock, which had been 5 minutes slow for 15 years.
This was the unofficial signal that passengers could begin their quiet migration toward the sleeper compartments. No one rushed. Rushing didn't belong on this train. People simply gathered their things in the slow, orderly fashion of people who have nowhere else to be. The Barlows were among the first to stand.
Margaret carefully rewrapped the sandwiches, even though no one had touched them. Mr. Barlow folded the seating diagram as though it might one day be of historical importance. Kevin sighed, as he did at every transition or moment, then stood up and followed without comment. The family moved down the aisle in a line so straight it looked rehearsed. Doris and Frank Mallory took their time. Doris placed her cardigan neatly over her arm, despite the fact that she'd need it again in approximately 5 minutes. Frank snapped the lid on his thermos, gave a small nod to no one in particular, and murmured, "Right then," as though something significant had happened. It hadn't. Neil, still devoted to his enormous suitcase, dragged it down the aisle with the determined pace of a man, moving furniture no one else had asked for. At each small corner, he muttered steady under his breath. The suitcase, as usual, offered no resistance, but also no help. Allison and Jake lingered. Jake tried to fold his oversized travel pillow in half. It didn't fold. Allison stared at the picnic bag with mild regret, as if realizing that bringing 6 types of cheese for a night train might have been optimistic. Eventually, they followed the slow stream toward the sleeping cars, whispering about which bunk was the comfiest, even though they were all exactly the same. Marjorie put her knitting away as if it were a delicate scientific instrument. She placed the oatmeal wool back into its plastic bag, smoothed it down, and checked twice that it was safe despite it being incapable of going anywhere. She then set off with the quiet dignity of someone escorting an imaginary dog. Trevor was the sort of man who believed in closing his notebook before standing up. He did so with a small, deliberate click of the cover, like signing a contract no one would ever read. He tucked his pen into his breast pocket, stood up, and joined the queue. He gave a polite nod to the corridor, as if it had been expecting him. Linda carried her unread book like a prize she'd won for participating. She didn't put it in her bag, just kept it in her hand as though someone might ask her about it at any moment. No one did. She walked slowly, reading the compartment numbers with the concentration of someone who had already forgotten which number she was looking for. The family with the matching neck pillows had split into 2 factions. The father and son who approached the corridor as though it were a military exercise, and the mother and daughter who moved at a speed best described as very slightly resentful. By the time they reached the door to their compartment, no one had said a word in 7 minutes. Raymond remained asleep until the gentle movement of everyone else passing by woke him just enough to lift his head. Without saying a word, he unfolded his arms, stood up, and walked straight to his compartment as though guided by some deeply boring instinct. He was asleep again before the door even clicked shut behind him. In the Barlows compartment, Margaret placed the sandwiches on the little shelf like they were valuables in a museum. Mr. Barlow adjusted the reading light twice, not because it needed adjusting, but because it felt like the kind of thing one does in a sleeper carriage. Kevin climbed onto the top bunk without looking at anyone, plugged his headphones in with no sound playing, and stared at the ceiling like it owed him an explanation. Doris and Frank were in no hurry. Frank lined his slippers up neatly beside the bed, even though no one was watching. Doris tucked the flower-shaped buttons of her cardigan underneath the pillow, for reasons unknown even to herself. Frank picked up the old newspaper again, **,
read a sentence he'd already read 3 times and gave it a nod of approval. As though the sentence had finally done a good job, Neo placed the large suitcase at the foot of the lower bunk. He then sat down beside it and gave it a short, satisfied look, as if the two of them had completed a long and complicated journey together. The suitcase, being a suitcase, had nothing to add. Allison and Jake tried for a full minute to agree on which bunk was better. Jake eventually took the top because Allison claimed she needed easy access to the picnic bag, which by now contained mostly crumpled napkins. They both laughed quietly, the way people do when they realize there is absolutely nothing else to do. Marjorie carefully positioned her knitting bag on the little fold-down table. Even though she wasn't planning to knit, she switched on the reading light but didn't read. She just stared at the war for a while, nodding every so often, like someone who had finally accepted the shape of beige. Trevor opened his notebook again, drew a small tick on a blank page, and closed it with the same precision as before. Then he lay back, hands folded neatly on his stomach, as though waiting for a very mild event that would never arrive. Linda flipped open her paperback to page 1, stared at the same opening sentence she'd looked at earlier, and closed it again. She turned off the light, lay down, and gave a quiet sigh that sounded exactly like someone settling in to think about nothing at all. The family with the matching neck pillows arranged themselves with the efficiency of a group who had done many family trips and expected very little from this one. The youngest child whispered, "I'm bored," and his father replied, "Good," as though boredom were the entire point. A minute later, the child was asleep. Raymond was already snoring softly, but in a way that somehow made no real impression on anyone. It wasn't the kind of snoring that disturbed. It was the kind that just existed, like the low hum of the train itself. And so the train continued through the night, at its usual unremarkable pace, heading toward a destination no one had particularly cared to remember. The carriages swayed in their familiar rhythm. The lights dimmed themselves down without being asked. And inside those sleeper compartments, one by one, the most boring passengers on the most boring night train in the world drifted off to sleep without a single interesting thing happening, listening to any of them.